Hello and welcome back with another spiritual series episode. And now for the next few episodes, we will be diving a bit more into spiritual tools. And today we will start with, I think, a spiritual tool that most of the people have heard of, or at least are aware of it existing, which is meditation. So, as per usual, maybe we can start with what is meditation?
Great. So again, like I always say, let's remember that the word meditation is just a word that allows us to communicate a concept. So different people could have different definitions of meditation. So let's look at what meditation is. Meditation is a word to describe a conscious choice or practice to become more aware and aligned. And there are so many different types of meditation. A lot of people think meditation means you need to sit with your fingers like this, staring at a wall or closed eyes, or, you can focus on your nostrils or the inside of your eyelids, but a lot of people basically, let's look at what the goal of meditation is. The goal of meditation is to bring yourself out of the clutter and the chaos of stimulation and a racing mind and drop more into your body and become observant of your mind. So instead of that helps you pilot your vehicle of consciousness, and it helps you become aware of what the software is in the supercomputer. Otherwise, like we talk about, 90 to 95% of the thoughts we think, the choices we make, the habits we perpetuate, and the patterns we experience are based on subconscious programming. So one of the goals of meditation is to become more embodied, to slow down, so to speak, or to become aware. It's increasing your awareness. So it's taking some of that software out of the subconscious running in the background and putting it in front of you so that you can choose, is this helpful software? Should I upgrade this software? Should I delete this software? And what would I like to replace it with? It can also be a great way to connect with your higher self, your guidance team, your angels, God, source, the universe, to feel your connection to everything and also to receive help, guidance, information. It can be a great way to observe your thoughts or allow old beach balls of emotions to arise. Some people, it helps them relax, stay focused. But again, remember that there's lots of different ways to meditate. Some people get into a meditative state when they're driving a car and they get home, they're like, whoa, I don't even remember how I got home. Or some people through knitting, or some men I know gently, like lovingly washing their car very slowly. Some people walking in a forest, playing an instrument. So there's different ways to meditate, and not everybody has to meditate. It's something that we're now like, oh, do you meditate? It's almost like a social obligation. And it's not a tool necessarily that everybody needs, but there are lots of different ways to meditate, and that can be helpful for people.
So, you mentioned getting into the meditative state. Is there a way to identify how to know that you are in that meditative state and how to men listening, how can they identify, similar to what you said, like sometimes it's literally washing your car, how can they identify what has already been working for them in case if there is something, or how can they approach exploring what is it that works for them?
Yeah. So there's also different layers or levels of meditative states we can reach, or states of consciousness, it would often be referred to. There's different levels of a meditative state. So there's different states of consciousness, as it could be called. But I think the most important goal, your goal might be enlightenment, it might be bliss states. I've reached those states, although not necessarily through meditation. I do it through what we'll talk about later, which is contemplation and mindfulness are my sort of go-to tools. But I've also done a lot of meditation. But it's more a state of when you feel calm or feel safe or feel like the monkey mind has temporarily quieted, or even if you have monkey mind, but you're able to watch it. Oh, I wonder what else is going to work today. Oh, I wonder what this happens. Oh, this person said this. I wonder how my sister's doing. It can be a very enlightened state of meditation to just be able to watch the chaos. You know, a lot of people believe that the goal of meditation is to not think. And I've reached those states, and there can be value in that. But I would say the more, I don't know, I feel like my mind usually is a pretty nice place to be. I don't need it to stop thinking because it's quite lovely. You know, most people are trying to stop the thinking because the thinking is like torture and it's telling you, you're not good enough. Da, 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 da. So it's trying to stop that. So sometimes meditation itself can be used as an avoidance strategy or an addiction or perfectionism because people then are like, am I meditating enough? Am I good enough meditator? Or they can come into states of somewhat calm as long as they're sitting in a quiet room with binaural beats in, quiet with no distractions, meditating alone by themselves, which is great. That can be a way to train ourselves into those states. But I've also worked with clients who meditated for hours a day for a decade or two, and they're still kind of struggling to feel fulfillment or anything pleasurable when they're not meditating. So meditation itself can sort of be an escape, or a way to not deal with the things that are trying to come up. So we're like, oh, okay, these thoughts and these feelings are trying to come up. I'm going to meditate so they go away. That's like, you know how we often refer to in our episodes about it's the energy behind the action. So when we do meditate, I think it's nice to just be curious and compassionate about what pops up rather than I have to go meditate to make this stop. That might be a time to do parts work. If there's a part of you that keeps trying to talk and keeps trying to talk and keeps trying to talk, at some point we might want to, doesn't always. Remember, nobody is the same. So there's not a, this is the way to do anything. That's why I like to have lots of tools in my toolbox because different people, different tools for different jobs for different people. But if we're meditating to avoid something that wants to come up, eventually it's kind of like putting burn cream on and touching the hot stove, putting burn cream on and touching the hot stove, putting burn cream on and touching the hot stove. So, okay, I only feel better when I'm meditating. What we eventually want to do is use that awareness or use those calm states to help us decide how we're piloting our vehicle of consciousness. And if we want to rewrite any software, or if we're being invited to do some parts work, or if there's something, a boundary or a want or a need or something that we want to address.
So what you mentioned, kind of what I wrote down is like authentic versus inauthentic kind of wanting to meditate. But with that, those reasons behind it or that intention, like you said, meditating to avoid, are there any things that men can identify that might be the, I don't say the bad or the wrong intentions behind it, but might not be like serving them as well?
I would say it's just healthy to do both, to both become aware of the thoughts, but then also actively deciding if those thoughts are in alignment or not in alignment. And I don't believe in trying to, it is a valid method. It's a valid method. Okay, so it's almost like wrestling a wild stallion and waiting for it to submit and making our brains submit. And that can sometimes work. And I've done that. I've done like silent meditation retreats, things like that, although I'm not much of a meditator. But I also think that being curious about what's coming up in the mind can be helpful. And I also sometimes think that just watching the thoughts go by and not attaching to them is helpful. But the most important goal is that you are the observer rather than the experiencer, right?
So you mentioned several times that you're not that big of a meditator. Can you talk on like what is it that you do? Especially keeping in mind that we're trying to even like educating listeners on different ways how you can meditate that might not necessarily be meditation. So what are some of the other ways and what are the ways that you prefer yourself or you have found working for you?
Yeah. So reflecting, knowing what I know now, I actually did a lot of meditation in childhood. I didn't know I was meditating. It was just something that I intuitively knew was helpful. And what I would do is I would lay in my bed and literally just stare at the back of my eyelids. Like I would just close my eyes and then I would just sort of imagine like looking into the darkness and I would try to explore it or I would just watch it. So when I tell people I don't meditate, I always like to disclose that I probably spent, I mean, thousands of hours in meditation as a child. So that might have actually been how I trained myself to be aware of my thoughts. But I've also gone through periods in later in life or in adulthood where I went sort of more unconscious and became the victim, not the victim, but the experiencer of my thoughts instead of the observer of my thoughts. And my favorite methods to come back into alignment are what people, I only learned this a couple of weeks ago from my husband, who is a meditator, and that is one of his favorite tools. And it works really, really well for him. Just like silent meditation, making himself sit there. He also has ADHD. So it's like, it actually works really, really well for him. But what he explained, he studied a lot of Buddhist practices and Hindu practices. And so he knows a lot more about those things than I do. I just sort of do things intuitively. And then he's like, oh, you're doing this or that. I'm like, oh, cool. Um, but so what I take is a path, what's called contemplation, where I just sit for hours and watch my thoughts and question them and challenge them. And I'm curious about them. Like, why do I think that? Oh, why do I want to pout right now? Why do I want to pout to my husband? What does that mean? Why am I doing this? Or why are my parents fighting? And I would spend hours just contemplating things quietly, often in nature. And that's when a lot of information would come to me. Another place that I meditate or contemplate, pick your metaphor, is in a bathtub. So I take a hot salt bath, and that just really relaxes me. And and I do it in silence. So silence can be another tool of contemplation or meditation or mindfulness, or often commonly called now, which is again something I've intuitively done throughout my life before even the invention of the internet, before I'd ever heard of any of these things, is dopamine detox. So it's just removing all the external distractions and coming back into your connection and awareness with self and how self is connected to everything. Um, Now, a lot of people that I've worked with struggle because they think they're bad meditators, or they're like, I don't reach states of bliss or enlightenment, or that person is a better meditator than me. And then it becomes like a new tool for the ego to prove, look what a good meditator I am, or look at, or comparing themselves to others. So, whatever meditation practice you try, whether it's contemplation, just sitting and observing your thoughts and questioning them and challenging them, which is slightly different than just daydreaming. Daydreaming is also a really good tool, though, because it helps us practice our imagination and gets us in touch with what they would call the right hemisphere of the brain. So that can also be a great practice, but it's not so much about just letting your thoughts. So in meditation, you could just observe the thoughts or try to gently let them float by and then go back to focusing on nothing, or focusing on your nostrils, or focusing on your eyelids, or focusing on a spot on the wall or a candle or whatever it is, or a word or a mantra. But in contemplation, it would be more like, this thought's coming up. I wonder what that is. Or I go into contemplation with like an intention of like, why do I feel frustrated when my husband does X, Y, or Z? Why is that? What does that mean? What does that tell me about myself? And I just go and I'm like, okay. And I just let my mind go. And I don't try to control it. I just watch it and I see if any helpful information comes through. And sometimes I follow thought trains. So it's like jumping into the thought almost. Whereas in meditation, it's sort of like not attaching to the thought, which is a great way to train yourself to have metacognition, which is awareness of your thoughts. Because like we talk about a lot with thoughts, you either believe a thought or you question a thought, or you let a thought just float by. But a lot of people think their thoughts are real. So they're constantly reacting to a bunch of nonsense mind chatter that's not even really true, because they say most of the thoughts we think are not even true. Like, my family doesn't appreciate me. Nobody likes me. I'm not good enough at my job, blah, blah, blah. If we don't know how to watch those thoughts, we're not piloting our vehicle of consciousness. It's piloting us down crazy road. And it means that we're not programming the software of the mind. We're experiencing the programming that was installed for us before the age of 7. So again, it may be authentically aligned and it may be helpful, and it may not be, but if you don't know how to watch the mind or slow the mind or quiet the mind, it's going to be really hard. And that's why I also like a dopamine detox, which is just trying to shut down a lot of the external noise so that it's easier to go within. So when we didn't have TV. Well, we had a TV, but we didn't have cable growing up. And I was the only one I knew without that. And now I'm really grateful to my mother, because it sort of forced my mind to be more creative. And I did more reading and more contemplating and more time in nature. She was like, I don't care what your friends are doing. You're not doing that. And I was like, you're the worst. Now I'm like, thank heavens she did that. So I didn't have constant distraction and chattering. Then I moved to this beautiful glacial lake in the mountains of Canada when I was about 20. I was intuitively told to move there in a state of contemplation. And we had sort of dorm rooms, so we had TV. And I was like, okay, well, this is great. We got really addicted to the TV. And I noticed how addicted the people around me were to the TV. And after a few months of enjoying that, with no guilt, there's no shame in that, but I noticed that I was getting crankier. I was less inspired, and my thinking was not as great. So I cut myself off from computers and TV, except what I had to use for work. And my brain like threw a fit. And I was cranky, I was agitated, I was frustrated. It's like your brain's like, give me a fish, 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 give me a fish. And if you won't do it, finally it's like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to fish. And then it starts finding different ways to amuse itself. And then I would get inspired, creative, connected to everything. So I noticed that my anxiety level goes up, my focus goes down, and my creativity and my intuition are cut off when I'm constantly stimulated. And I think most of our society is constantly overstimulated, especially now with social media, Twitter, Facebook. When I went and lived in the forest in a beautiful home on an acreage, not just like living in a forest, we got rid of TV. I barely used my cell phone. I had a landline installed into the house. And I was like, if people want to call me, there's the phone. I didn't go on social media for years. And I spent a lot of time in contemplation and mindfulness, which put me in a meditative state. So I basically stayed in a meditative state for like 3 years straight and hit levels of a bliss or enlightenment or whatever words you want to call them. But most people don't have time or the ability to do that. So I used that time very strategically to figure out what are the most important. That's the magnetic masculinity blueprint actually came out of that time. It was like, how can I use this state to figure out tools that people can use who don't have time to go disappear into a forest quietly by themselves and not speak to people for years? I mean, I spoke to people sometimes, but like maybe once a week in town or on the weekends when my roommate would come home or something, but mostly in silent contemplation and mindfulness, which put me in that meditative state, which allowed me to have constant information and almost no chatter. So I did no social media, no television, no like nothing distracting or overstimulating. So now living in the middle of America, in the suburbs with my husband and working online like we do and things like that, we do it now in different ways. So we have TV maybe once every 2 weeks on a Friday night, we'll pick a movie. But the rest of the time we don't. And people are like, what do you do if you don't watch TV? And I'm like, well, at first, for a couple weeks, you'll probably get really agitated and bored and frustrated, and your mind will have a little temper tantrum. But eventually it'll be like, fine, if you won't give me something to do, I'll figure out something to do. And I would start like, I built a deck on my old house. Me, I built a deck. I repainted the whole house. I started like 9 different projects. I took online courses. I would learn. My husband and I choose a book. We'll do a fiction book, then a nonfiction book, and we read to each other. We sit on the couch with soft lighting and we read books out loud to each other. We go for walks together. We just sit and talk. Um, so yeah, and when I taught myself photography and then started within a year, I did that again. I did a low dopamine or a dopamine detox again before I went out to the forest for a few years. And again, I had become food addicted, social media addicted, television addicted. And I was like, I don't feel great. Most people feel that way all the time because they've never experienced a different baseline. But the beauty slash hard part is once you've experienced those other states, that state that most people are in that they think is great, to me feels like torture. Because I know I have something to compare it to, but most people I know don't. They've never experienced not that. So again, I took the TV away. I cut myself down to only using computer for work or creative pursuits. I went and spent more time in nature. I was walking dogs. I owned my own company at that time and a dog daycare. And I literally, yeah, just cut off all of those external things. And I was frustrated for about 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, I had this inspiration to take up photography. And I was like, photography? I don't know. And I started it and I got obsessed with it. And within a year, I was teaching for a famous camera store. I was giving workshops to people from all over, people driving hours away to come to my workshops. I was listed one of the top 100 pet photographers. I was teaching photography to people who had been doing it for 30 years because I was just in this constant state of inspiration, focus, and also wanting to alleviate that boredom. But and there's no way I would have done that. And then I started a company and I was shooting commercial photography within 2 years, and I shot for like Subway and Toyota. And I had never picked up a camera before. I did it 100% manual. I never cheated, never shot an auto, and I was really knowledgeable about it because I had that focus, because I had no distraction. So these are all just different. I'm just telling people different little practices, different things to consider when we talk about the word meditation.
Can you maybe talk on the importance of boredom when it comes to, or not even the importance, but even like if there's any link to mindfulness or meditation or being present
Mhm.
or more focused when it comes to being bored?
Yeah, so I don't love being bored. And I have ADHD, so I really don't love being bored. However, when you're in those states, there's no such thing as boredom because you just feel complete and inspired and aligned and motivated or relaxed. But in order to get there, you're probably going to have to go through a couple of stages more than once. And people go through this in meditation too. I have a client who's got a very busy monkey mind. He's the CEO of a very big, impactful commercial real estate company. And when I had him start meditating, he was like, I hate this. I'm terrible at it. I'm bored. And I'm like, it's okay. Do it for 5 minutes a day. Do it for 10 minutes a day. You can't, here's the thing about meditating is you can't fail at it. Don't make the goal to have a quiet mind or be in a bliss state. Just make it a goal to watch your mind for 10 minutes or take deep breaths for 10 minutes, focusing on your breath, focusing on your eyelids, focusing on a spot on the wall, whatever, there's a zillion different methods and they're all valid. And it's, and sometimes you have to try 3 or 4 different tools till you find the one that's like, that's the one for me. And he's like, but I'm not good at it. My mind just races the whole time. And I'm like, but you watched it race the whole time. You were in a meditative state. Congratulations, you meditated. And at first, our brain might have a little temper tantrum and might be like, oh, you want to listen to me? Fine. And then it might like get frustrated like a little kid. And it's like, give me what I want. Give me what I want. Hey, turn on Twitter. Hey, what's on Twitter? Hey, what do you want to eat later? We should have French fries. Anything to stimulate itself, stimulate itself, stimulate itself. And then eventually it just kind of gives up. And then you feel really good or you go into boredom. So it depends which method you're using. But if you're in a meditative state and your mind sort of finally surrenders, you're not really going to feel bored because you're going to feel whole and complete and content. If you're doing a dopamine detox or contemplation, you might go through stages of boredom. But the boredom is often the catalyst for inspiration, right? A lot of great things come out of boredom because again, our mind is like, I have to do something. I can't just do nothing. And we're like, okay, here you go, watch TV, binge watch Netflix, all those things that I am easily addicted to too. In fact, I'm extremely easily addicted to anything. I just noticed that I just have this constant desire to feel good and to feel happy. And I know that those things are like eating hot dogs and getting like a little bit of vegan, so maybe I don't, but it's like eating hot dogs and missing out on a 5-course gourmet meal of your favorite food genre. So it's, yeah, does that make sense?
Can you also maybe talk on, so there was meditation as meditation, then there was contemplation. Can you also talk on mindfulness as a way to meditate?
Yeah. So mindfulness is being present with what you're doing. So when you're say washing the dishes, putting your clothing away, often you're like, can you think of a time in your life where you're doing some of those things and then you're done? Do you remember doing those things? Probably you're like, oh yeah, I kind of did the dishes. I kind of remember that. I was thinking about this, that. It's trying to be present with where you are, not having your mind fear what's happening in the future or dwelling on what's happening in the past. And mindfulness can be a tool for that I really like because my natural state is very hyper or very disconnected. I'm always sometimes out of body. I'm in the future. I'm in the past. I'm downloading. I'm not always present. And one of the gifts that I have nowadays is the ability to really be present with people. And that's one of the things that my clients value the most is wherever I am, I'm 1,000,000% there. When I'm working with a client, I am completely unaware of everything around me. I am completely tuned into them, focused on them, receiving them, perceiving them. And that's something that I have trained through some of these practices because most people don't have the ability to be totally present. They're thinking, oh, I wonder what I'm going to do shopping later. Oh, I can't wait till the next episode of Love is Blind comes out this week. Oh my God, French fries would be delicious. What is this person talking about? Oh, I know what they're going to say. People always tell me, I always know what other people are going to say. So I just, and most people are just skipping and skimming and their mind is jumping around and filling in blanks based on its own experiences. And so they're not present. And that's what everybody wants is presence. But that's something that can be trained. And mindfulness is one of my favorite ways to train that. So it's like whatever you're doing, do it. Just bring, and your mind will go, ah, there's sunny outside. We could go to the park. You can be like, we could. And then you bring it back to the dishes. You know, you turn off all the distraction. It doesn't mean that you can't listen to music or podcasts in the future, but if you're constantly, I spoke to a woman yesterday. I went for my acupuncture appointment, and she's the administrative assistant that keeps everybody functioning in that office, shared office. And she always likes to ask me questions when I come in. And I was like, they always have the food channel on. And I was standing there watching it, and I was like, it's like, I could never have this at my house. This is so addictive. Like, I'm just like, every time I come in, my brain's like, we get to watch the Food Network while we're in the waiting room. I'm like, great. And I said to her, I could never have this at home. She said, I have to sleep with a TV on. She's like, I have to listen to podcasts in the car. I have TV on 24 hours a day at my house in every room. And I was like, whoa, whoa. And I explained to her some of these concepts. And I was like, what is it that you are trying to distract yourself from? It might be trauma. It might be like, it can actually be a form of PTSD or trauma to try to always stimulate ourselves so that we don't slow down enough to let those emotional beach balls come up, or we feel too uncomfortable with our emotions. Which is why when you follow the magnetic masculinity blueprint, I've thought of all of these things. So that's why I do things in a very specific order that sort of create the perfect environment for you to experience or be able to be in awareness of your states. And that's, yeah. And one of the things we haven't really addressed is stimulation and dopamine. And I'm saying dopamine detox, it's actually much more complex than that. That's the common term that we'll understand, but it's not just, oh, you do this, you get more dopamine. It impacts your oxytocin, your serotonin, your norepinephrine, a lot of different things. And there are also other reasons that you don't have those things that could be chemical or environmental or whatever. But just for this sake, because this is an episode about that. So mindfulness is that presence. And I noticed that when I watch TV or listen to a lot of podcasts, or for me, the worst is when it was suggested I try TikTok, like doing TikTok for people. And I started looking at short form videos, my brain turned to mush. My concentration went like almost non-existent. And I'd be sitting with my husband and I'd be thinking, oh God, I wonder if there's more cute animal videos or whatever stupid thing I was looking at. And I noticed that my presence and my ability to function, even my ability to talk with you in the podcast, I could notice my mind jumping and skipping and skimming and losing things. And yeah, and I felt, and it's like, and when you're in those states, it's almost like you're in a constant state of dissatisfaction and craving and yearning and longing. And that's part of the reason that I use food as a contemplation or meditation or mindfulness practice. I make everything from scratch. I don't eat high dopamine foods. And when my husband and I eat, we sit down, we look at the colors of our food. We think about all of the people that went into making that food. Like most people, when I watch them, or even when they're eating, if we're in sessions, it's just mindless. It's just feeding the dopamine machine, feeding our body things that make it sick. So for me, food and eating is one of my favorite mindful practices. And then I wash each dish. Like I love washing dishes. It's not that I would want to do that forever, Like it's not like I'll just could wash dishes all day in a state of bliss. Although when I'm in a bliss state, I could literally do that. When I'm in a bliss state, I could sit and stare at a piece of grass for 5 hours and be fascinated, which I'm not in right now. But it's, yeah, so that even food and eating can be a meditative, mindful practice or a contemplative practice. Like we thank the farmers, we thank the sun, we thank the food angels, we thank the weather, we thank, we thank people that worked on that food. We thank the sunlight in the food. We thank the food because that food is about to become a part of my body forever. It's going to be a permanent part of my vibration. And then we eat slowly. And I think about the flavors and the textures in my mouth. I chew my food a lot. So I'm not in this constant state, which I definitely can be and have been, and am almost a little bit right now in this more craving state, this constant craving state that never goes away. When you're on the other side of that, I can only tell you, it's really amazing. It's just like everything comes together. You feel content, you feel happy, you feel fulfilled, you feel inspired, you feel creative. Whatever your creative is, creative can be thinking, you can be a creative mechanic, you can be a creative stock investor, it just it just it's so much more fulfilling than the dopamine craving and the addictions that we all have addictions. Everybody has addictions to food, sugar, gluten. So another way to train the mind is by tackling your addictions. And that's another method that I've gone through. Like I have no caffeine, no alcohol, no processed sugar, no gluten, no dairy. I don't eat processed foods. I don't eat restaurant food. Um, but I'm not like, I don't see it as an act of deprivation. I see it as an act of self-love. And I found, and I used to be very food addicted, extremely food addicted. I ate nachos for breakfast and called them brachos because they were breakfast nachos. So, because I was like super cheese addicted. So I was always craving, 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 craving. And now, and I went through, it probably took a year, I would have wicked cravings. But now I'll crave Brussels sprouts. Or this week I'm craving artichokes. And I'm like, oh, I'm just steaming. I went and bought a whole case of organic artichokes. And when I eat them, I'm just like, wow, this is delicious. Like I'm present. There's no TV on. Whatever I'm doing that. Wherever I am, I'm there. When I'm driving, I'm driving. When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you. When I'm making tea, I'm making tea. When and now I don't have this perfect, but all of these are different ways to achieve a goal. And that is, I think it's important to remember the goal of meditation, mindfulness, or contemplation, which is more integration, more peace, more harmony, more creativity, and that ability to pilot your vehicle of consciousness rather than be strapped in the back seat going for a ride down Craving Town.
You mentioned when you were, I think it was at the time when you were in a forest, that you were contemplating and being mindful, and that led you to meditative state. Can you talk on like meditative state, what it is, and what's the importance of it, or why it's important or helpful?
Well, first of all, it's not the most important thing. I was never seeking bliss, enlightenment. I was never actually seeking any of those things. In fact, I hadn't heard of those words. I was just earnestly and genuinely trying to be a better person. Another way that I reached those states, though, in parallel to that, is I ate 479 shit sandwiches. I was genuinely trying to be a better person, trying to be more mindful and present because I loved myself and I wanted to be the best version of myself, not from a place of I'm not good enough or from a place of self-deprecation. It was all like an act of self-love and just wanting to be better, just do better. So that's an important piece of that too. And what we call meditative states, my husband would probably be better at that because he's like, oh, in this culture they call it this, and in this culture this, and this is this state of bliss and this state of bliss. And so when I talk, he's like, oh, you reached samadhi state. Oh, you're a bodhisattva. Oh, you did this. Oh, you did that. And I've never heard of those words. So there are words, and other people would be more qualified to share those, but there are different levels of meditation. But what I mean is, I don't know if it's helpful to share this, because if I didn't, I don't necessarily think you should believe something you haven't experienced, which is why I want people to experience things for themselves. But from doing those practices and disconnecting a little bit from external reality, I literally had like tears pouring down my face, blissed out, energy bursting from every part of my body, knowledge. I could just understand things by thinking about them, literally like light shining through the window, golden light, weeping in gratitude. And then I spent months in bliss states, just everything was perfect. I'd be like, oh, like just nothing seemed wrong with anything. I just was so in this state of completion and gratitude. I didn't crave anything. I didn't want anything. I just felt whole and complete and connected to every single person and every single thing and every single cell on this planet and beyond. Now, if that's your goal going into it, though, I wonder, although if you have that desire, you can't suppress that desire either. So I don't think that would be helpful. But if you're going into it with that goal, I don't know if I would have reached it. I was just focusing on little things that I could do, removing one food addiction at a time and drinking more water, cutting out social media, really speaking to myself with a lot of kindness and compassion, like we started at the beginning of the blueprint, self-compassion, speaking to myself so lovingly every day, cheering myself on, practicing mindfulness, practicing meditation. And every time I failed, which was about 5,000 times, I would just be like, that's okay. I'm really proud of you. You got this. I was also facing fears. I was also challenging beliefs in contemplation. So I never had that the goal, those states. And again, we could call them different states of consciousness. Dr. David Hawkins had a really good scale of consciousness. Abraham Hicks has a good emotional scale. If you study certain Eastern, like Hindu or Buddhist traditions, they will have different words for those things. Bliss states, enlightenment states, pick your metaphor. They're all valid metaphors. But I think what a good goal is to just become aware of your thoughts. Awareness is the best goal. Maybe, I don't know, I can't say it's the best, but I think it's a more tangible goal so that people don't fall in the trap of feeling like they're failing or missing out or not a good meditator, because those natural things that I see are going to prevent experiencing some of those more cohesive levels of consciousness that are actually already who you are at your core being.
How to know if it's working, the meditation practices, or if it's working for you?
Your family will tell you. No, just kidding. So sometimes, and I could do it in a cheeky way, but sometimes I'll say to my husband, like, have you been meditating lately? Do you want some time to do that? Like, it's people are going to know, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel better. Right. And at the end of the day, anything we do, anything, you tell me any goal, even if it's charity work, because there's no such thing as altruism necessarily, even if it's doing charity work, finding a partner, breaking up with a partner, all we're doing all the time is trying to seek to feel better or feel happy. So I think you'll know. I think you should just assume that it's working. Even if that's, I don't really like this tool. I tried breath work, it didn't work. Or I tried, but give something a try. Because if you try to meditate for 10 minutes a day and in 5 days your mind is still racing, I want you to assume it's working. Give it like a month or two and just say, I'm in the training phase. And then if after a month or two, you're like, I actually really hate this activity, great. Then try going for a 10-minute, 20-minute walk every day in nature with no cell phone, no podcast, no music. Like I see people in the forest when I go forest bathing or forest walking, and this isn't a judgment. I just think, wow. And they're in this like gorgeous, beautiful forest, and both of them have headphones in, or one of them's playing music out loud and carrying music with them, or, it's just, we're just constantly stimulated. So go for a walk, but don't bring your phone. Wake up in the morning, and when your brain says, oh God, check your messages. How many notifications do you have? Check your emails. Say to your mind, no, I'll do it in 45 minutes. I'm sorry, you're probably not that important that if you can't check your messages or wake up 30 minutes earlier and wait 30 to 45 minutes to check your messages. I guess part of it is just saying no to your brain, not in like in a mean way, but just sort of, it's like a child having a temper tantrum. You just don't want it to be in charge. And that requires saying no to it because your brain is lazy. It wants what it wants. And it's your body and your brain are going to be craving stimulation all the time and craving whatever makes them feel good. So sometimes the greatest meditation is just saying no to yourself. Right? It's like master your addictions, master your habits, master your life. So your meditative practice could be eating oranges in the morning instead of bacon and eggs, or, having a glass of water and sitting for 5 minutes and just watching your thoughts. Oh, I'm thinking about how stupid that podcast of Sandy's I listened to, who told me to do this because this is the dumbest activity I've ever done. I'm definitely failing at it. It's not working clearly. I'll probably fail at this like I fail at every blah, blah, blah. Just watch it and be like, I nailed it. Whatever you did, be like, I nailed it. That's a good job. I nailed it. I'm so good at this. I'm the best meditator. I'm amazing.
How to know, even like going back to your example with walking in forest and let's say listening music in the background, how to know if that's actually you being overstimulated,
Mhm.
or it's something that you actually want or you enjoy or you feel like it's actually.
It's a
I think
good
even like with some
question.
people's experience, even like with music, they feel like it's feeding their soul. So how to know
Yeah.
kind of like which one is which
Yeah.
and distinguish like, am I trying to escape something or am I
Yeah.
actually like doing it because I authentically want to do that?
That's a really good question. So maybe that's a really good question because music can bring you into a meditative state. Dancing can bring you into a meditative state, right? There's like ecstatic dancing, or um, you know, moving and beautiful music can bring you into a state of meditation or mindfulness or contemplation or presence or embodiment or grounding, or pick your metaphor. So that's a very good question. I would just say, if you love that and it brings you joy, do it. And schedule some time during the week for silence. Are you spending time just silent? And now something for men too is that when you're in these states, often the thoughts that you don't want to look at, the feelings you haven't wanted to feel start to come up. I also think it's important to mention that trauma can play a role in here. So the nervous system can get very activated if it's calm, because there might be traumas coming up, or it's like all those beach balls start to try to rise up. And we talked about that in one of our episodes, emotional beach balls. Emotions are like a beach ball filled with air. You push them under the water, you try to hold them there, and it takes a lot of energy because you're trying to hold 175 beach balls under the water. And if you stop long enough, they start popping up, popping up, popping up. So be aware that at the beginning, emotions might come up too. And if you're avoiding or resisting that, it's suboptimal. And if you just want to be trauma aware that your nervous system might be in a reaction to trauma in childhood. A lot of men have trauma or PTSD, CPTSD, because they were forced to cut off from their emotional navigation system and told, don't cry and be a man, and you have to do this and you have to do that. So a lot of men are traumatized, and that's why they want to stay busy and keep busy. So just see if you have follow the magnetic masculinity blueprint. It kind of helps you go through that process of presence, or find a trauma-informed coach or therapist or group or practice, and just use a lot of self-compassion, but don't be afraid of what's coming up, because it's better out than in. And you don't have to, again, I will say one of the main goals, the first goals, is to become aware of your thinking. So again, just watch your thoughts, because that is actually a very high state of being, is able to watch your thoughts. Most people are not able to do that. I didn't know that. I learned that through my husband. And that's how I figured out how I probably trained that over my life, but I'm almost always aware of 4 or 5 thoughts happening at all times. So I can sort of assess them. I sort them. Is this one helpful? Is that one helpful? Or I let them go by. But I learned that a lot of people believe their thoughts. And I can remember times in my life that I look back now and I'm like, oh yeah, I believed a thought like, oh, my friend didn't call me back because she's mad at you because X, Y, or Z. And she's probably at home, never going to speak to you again. And I would believe those thoughts and I would be traumatized by them. And then I'd find out, oh no, she fell and broke her ankle and had to go to the hospital. So I can see times in my life when I've been in that state and out of that state. So I really think training yourself to observe your thoughts, AKA become aware of the programming, so that you can start to find your authentic alignment. Like, if your parents told you a lot in childhood, like rich people are the root of evil, or you can't trust women, or whatever it is, um, a lot of those thoughts are going to run in your head. You're going to think those thoughts are you, but they're not. So I'd say your biggest goal should be awareness, awareness of awareness, and then awareness of being able to use metacognition, which is the ability to zoom out and observe what's happening so that you're piloting that vehicle of consciousness. It's not piloting you. We don't want it running on autopilot. Sometimes we want it running on autopilot. I specifically and consciously put my body on autopilot sometimes for certain things, but I'm doing it consciously. And I'm choosing what programs I want to run on autopilot, like positive self-talk or nutritional reminders. I run those things on autopilot. But again, if most of our software of the mind is installed before the age of 7 by external sources while we're living in the emotional dark ages, it's mostly fair to assume that a lot of us have subconscious software and programs that have nothing to do with who we are, that aren't helpful, and you're believing those thoughts and you think those thoughts are real. And meditation or contemplation or mindfulness are all helpful tools of the various forms of meditation, which there are just a zillion ways to meditate. Are the goal of them is awareness and integration and self-awareness and compassion and pulling yourself out of the program and realizing you're so much more than that.
How
And
do
if you
you,
make that the goal, you're more likely to get the outcome you desire rather than trying to seek the outcome, which is why I created, again, the magnetic masculinity blueprint. I'm like, this plus this equals being magnetic, AKA open, expanded, confidence, clarity, emotional mastery, self-awareness, authentically aligned, inspired, inspiring to others, energized. That's the outcome of doing the work on our vehicle of consciousness, being the pilot of it, the software programmer of it, the mechanic of it, and separating the conditioned self from the authentic self so that you're piloting that vehicle of consciousness towards your most fulfilling life. And meditation, contemplation, and mindfulness are helpful tools, and also just really popular topics right now on the planet that are just a tool to help you feel great. But sometimes that involves feeling really lousy and frustrated or bored before you get there. But I promise you it's worth it on the other side.
so you talked about kind of using meditation as a escape mechanism, how can men listening, if they identify that might be something that they might be doing, how can they bridge that gap between practicing it and then applying it in real life?
There's lots of different schools of thought about that, lots of different tools, lots of different procedures. Um, I would say, so I had a client come to me and he meditated every day for, I think, maybe 15 years, but his marriage was a mess. His work life was, he was very wealthy, but his work life was frustrated. People were agitated and frustrated with him a lot. He never felt satisfied. He was a little bit overweight. His habits weren't great. So, look around at your life and say, is this tool working for me? But he would tell me, I'm a really good meditator. And I'm like, great. I celebrate that for you. But is it working? Let's also add other things. I guess they could just go and contemplate it.
Yeah.
Because I can't give one answer because there's so many different factors and so many different people, and I don't want to give misinformation or bad information because nobody's journey looks the same. Just remember, you can't fail at meditating. But if you're using meditation to escape something, at some point it's going to be helpful to face that thing also.
All right. So that's meditation. Anything you want to add?
No, that's great. And let us know if you have any questions or share your favorite meditation practice or what works for you, because men are less likely to leave comments, but they can be very inspiring to other men, because I guarantee if you've had an experience with meditation, at least one other man out there has had it. And seeing that you wrote that can make them feel like they're not alone. So I encourage you to tune into that divine masculine bravery and be willing to share a little bit with other men to help them on their journey.
Yeah. And we will see you next week when we talk on the next tool.
Thank you.